Welcome to the motherfucking relay. We're covering today's top boxing news.
Okay, we'll start with this. PBC and Showtime scrapped December 9th pay-per-view show. The final Showtime boxing telecast is in the works for that same month on the 16th.
There were rumors of a potential Mayweather pay-per-view on the 9th, the same day as Haney versus Prograis.
Guess they decided to scrap that idea, but there will be a final Showtime Championship Boxing broadcast after all. BoxingScene.com has learned that the PBC has scrapped its plans for what would have been a Showtime pay-per-view event December 9th at the MGM Grand Garden Arena in Las Vegas. Showtime instead will televise a 3-bout show live on the network December 16th from the Armory in Minneapolis. The fights for the Showtime Championship Boxing tripleheader December 16th have not been solidified. The card is not expected to include two of the more expensive fights that were supposed to make up half of the pay-per-view show that was in the works for the 9th. A Montestenionis versus Keith Thurman and Erislandy Lara versus Danny Garcia.
In the PBC's own mind, it probably wasn't a good idea to waste those two fights on the Showtime platform that isn't going to be airing any boxing anymore beyond this year. You might as well save those two.
As Paramount Global, the parent company of Showtime and BoxingScene.com, announced October 17th that the company will shut down its Showtime sports department as of December 29th. The decision will end the premium cable network's 37-year run as a prominent American boxing broadcaster next month. Showtime will produce 2 or more live events before it exits the boxing business.
It's a strategy here.
Initial rumors indicated that Floyd would be headlining the show, and a Montestenionis versus Keith Thurman and Danny Garcia versus Erislandy Lara, those would be the undercard fights. So perhaps they couldn't find anybody for Floyd to fight, someone with a profile who could help them sell it. It could be that way, or it could be that maybe they're saving a show like that for their new broadcast partner, part of the sales pitch, whoever that broadcast partner might be. Maybe it's Amazon.
Maybe it's not.
Whoever it is, he needs to have something to offer to go into business with a new broadcast partner. You've got those 2 fights left with Canelo, those 2 fights left on the deal. You also have Gervonta Davis's fights, and whoever he ends up fighting, rumor has it, it's going to be Usyk again on Amazon. And perhaps this show involving Floyd Mayweather and Danny Garcia versus Erislandy Lara, Keith Thurman versus a Montestenionis, or maybe they divide those fights.
To see what I mean, they need to have something to offer a new broadcast partner. They need to save that content. Don't waste it on Showtime.
Wiz fighting on Showtime, and what will be their final boxing telecast is David Morell Jr., who has called Minneapolis home since he came to the United States from Cuba, and he will headline Showtime's final boxing broadcast December 16th. From the Armory in downtown Minneapolis, the PBC is in the process of solidifying an opponent for the undefeated super middleweight. I wouldn't mind seeing David Morell in there with Carlos Gangara, a decent-sized puncher at super middleweight who has since rebounded off the loss to Christian Mabili in what was their war, a Fight of the Year candidate, in my humble opinion. Carlos lost that fight, but he has since had a rebound fight. He's back in the winner's bracket, and I wouldn't mind seeing David Morell fight him. 2 big punchers, the chance for the PBC to go out with a bang instead of a whimper.
We'll see who they end up getting. Context is key. This is the final fight on the Showtime platform. And as much as you would like for them to go out with a bang, because this is the final telecast, they don't have that many resources at this point.
Those other fights, Garcia versus Lara, Thurman versus Stanionis, those are relatively more expensive fights to put on than getting a David Morell out there. David Morell, he's not a 7-figure fighter. Not yet he is, and I have no doubts that Danny, Keith, Lara, they want to make a lot of money, and right now Showtime ain't got it to blow.
Plus, going head-to-head with another box office fight that same night, that's not a good idea. Not unless you have something strong to put on.
Something strong enough to draw eyes away from the DAZN show happening that same night and over to yours. It could be that way. Could be, like I said before, could be they don't want to waste that content on Showtime, knowing that Showtime is done in the sport.
They're finished.
This news has been received with mixed reviews. Showtime's exit from the sport of boxing, a cautionary tale to some, a tragedy to others. In truth, I would have preferred to see them change their business practices than to see them leave.
The sport of boxing losing another major broadcaster in the American market. It seems that globally, the sport of boxing has grown. Several different markets out there in the boxing cosmos, out there in the world, flourishing, like the British market, the UK market, which is bigger now than it's ever been.
The Asian market is blossoming with great fighters like Kazuto Ioka and Kenshiro Teraji, Junto Nakatani, and of course, Naoya Inoue, and his brother, Takuma Inoue. There are good fighters coming out of that region and good money being made. The same applies to the Australian market, which I think is a lot bigger now than it ever was in previous years. But here in the United States, well, it's not your father's era of boxing.
The fragmentation of the sport. Too much division, too many sides of the street, too many chiefs, and not enough Indians.
And too many filler fights. Far too many safe fights on the Showtime platform that just don't grab people's attention. That's where they went wrong. That's where they went wrong.
That went on for far too long. You're wasting the audience's time and the broadcaster's money, so here we are.
The end of Showtime Boxing. In men's heavyweight news, it appears that the show will go on December 23rd, just without Tyson Fury and Alexander Usyk. Apparently, Francis Ngannou, the debutant, Francis Ngannou, the man of the hour, he will be boxing on December 23rd. Saudi Arabia are pressing ahead with a show on December 23rd. Despite the delay on Fury's undisputed clash with Usyk, the two heavyweights were supposed to finally meet on December 23rd to decide who is the planet's number one heavyweight. But after Fury's bruising encounter with Francis Ngannou this past Saturday, that date has now been pushed back. It has been reported that despite a contract stipulating a December 23rd clash, the pair will now collide in February, giving Fury more time to rest in the wake of the split decision victory over Francis Ngannou.
This past weekend, on the undercard of Fury vs. Ngannou, you saw former champion Joseph Parker take on Simon Keane.
And Joe actually looked sharp. He actually looked good opposite the ring. Simon Keane, who he knocked out off a peach of an uppercut. He made some mention after the fight of returning to action in December on the undercard of what was supposed to be Fury versus Usyk.
So I imagine we're gonna see Joe in December.
As far as Fury's clash this past weekend with boxing debutant Francis Ngannou, that marked the start of Riyadh season, a 6-month festival in the Saudi Arabian capital. He was then supposed to box Usyk at the midway point before their contracted rematch in March, at the very end of the event. But Boxing News understands that Saudi are still plotting a huge money-spinning card on December 23rd to mark the middle of Riyadh season, even though neither Fury or Usyk will feature. Thus, it is highly likely that Ngannou's second fight as a professional will top the bill, with the likes of both Zhang and Joseph Parker touted as opponents for the 37-year-old former UFC champion, who dropped Fury with a left hook in the third round of their 10-rounder. High-level talks about the clash have been taking place this week, with an announcement expected at some point next week. On the undercard, 20-1 heavyweight Martin Bakole is likely to feature once more following his fourth-round stoppage of Carlos Takam at the Kingdom Arena on Saturday night. The Scotland-based Congolese puncher became a crowd favorite in Riyadh after making a huge impression on the Saudis, who have now requested that he box again on December 23rd. And it sounds like another big show, though you have to wonder, are they really thinking about putting Francis in there with the likes of Zhang and Joseph Parker? It was different ahead of the Fury fight because Francis at least had the element of surprise working for him, that nobody had ever seen him box before, thus there's no film to study, no idea what he brings to the table. But now, having looked the way that he looked with Tyson Fury, and that film being made available for either Zhang or Joseph Parker to get a look at, you have to wonder, are they really going to risk putting him in there with one of them? I think that given the notice for the show, the notice for the card. A guy like Manuel Char, who's not busy with anything and he has a WBA regular title, that would make a little bit more sense.
But what about Derek Chisora? He's always up for a fight, and he's always up for another payday. He hasn't retired yet.
And he is coming off that points decision win over Gerald Washington this past August. I think people forgot that in between the time that he fought Fury and where we are now, he squeezed in a fight and he got himself back in the winner's bracket. He didn't look that good in that fight. Better still, he's a serviceable fighter, and from where I'm sitting, an ideal choice for Francis Ngannou in December. You say to yourself that, well, he was just in there with arguably the #1 heavyweight in the world. Derek Chisora or Emmanuel Char, those would be a step backwards, not forwards.
But if the goal is to get him to another Fury fight, get him to a Fury rematch, you don't just throw him to the wolves.
There's a legitimate argument that Francis caught Tyson Fury at the perfect time, when Tyson's underestimating the MMA fighter turned boxer, and Tyson Fury himself has become complacent. He wants to be on easy street. Whoever Francis fights next, they're not going to underestimate him based on that fight. And Zhang, he's certainly not a fat and happy fighter.
He's not complacent at all. Look at the run of fights that he's been on. Unbeaten Filip Hrgovic, unbeaten Joe Joyce, who he just stopped 2 times back-to-back.
You would be jeopardizing all the money you could make with Ngannou versus Fury 2 by putting Francis Ngannou in there with Zhang. There are safer options, and context is key. This would be Francis's only second fight as a professional boxer.
It is a relatively nuanced situation that does not rely necessarily on the dance partner to help sell it. Just the fact that he's getting back out there and he's doing as well as he's doing, that's the sales pitch.
That's the attraction. Thus, the idea that he might fight the likes of a Zhang or even a Joseph Parker. What you have to understand is that this is boxing, and styles make fights. You had the right ingredients to take Tyson Fury by surprise, but now people know not to underestimate you.
Eddie Hearn said that he made contact with Team Ngannou to see about doing a Joshua fight, but I don't think it's Joshua. I don't think it's Anthony Joshua he's going to be fighting on this kind of notice, or Deontay Wilder for that matter, though that would be a pleasant surprise.
Those would be very big fights, though I don't get the sense on this kind of notice, on this kind of timetable, that will be Francis's next fight.
But we'll see.
As it pertains to a potential Ngannou versus Wilder fight, Malik Scotch, Wilder's trainer, believes that Ngannou is a lot more dangerous to Wilder than Andy Ruiz. It might seem like a bit of a hot take at first, but styles, they do make fights. And while Andy, under the right circumstances, is dangerous to Wilder,
Let's talk about it.
in a conjectural world where Scotch was given the chance to make all of the decisions, both Ruiz and Ngannou would jump to the top of the list. In terms of who he would actually choose, that's an easy one. He would take the fighter that's simply more fearsome and deadly in the ring. I think Ngannou is a lot more dangerous than Ruiz, Scotch told BoxingScene.com recently. And when you think about Andy's characteristics, his qualities as a fighter, he's got great counters, great hand speed mid-range to inside, but he's got slow feet. He's got flat feet.
He can be very dangerous within close quarters, but he has to get there first, and him being so much shorter than Deontay Wilder, shorter legs, shorter strides, heavier feet, getting within striking distance of Wilder without getting caught.
We've talked about this. We've talked about this before. We've talked about how in the Luis Ortiz fight, you saw Andy Ruiz get caught with several straight left hands from out of the southpaw stance, Luis Ortiz being a southpaw. You saw how many times Andy got caught with that backhand, and he took it well. He took the punches well, but Luis Ortiz is an older, slower fighter than Deontay Wilder, not as much on the punches. If Wilder caught Andy with a straight right hand, the way that Ortiz caught Andy with a straight left hand, how would Andy take it? That's the question, and it's conceivable that Wilder would land his money punch.
And that means that Francis Ngannou is more dangerous than Andy. That's what you're telling me.
He showed patience, he showed punching power, he's very disciplined. Andy's kryptonite is anyone that's disciplined. Is Andy a better boxer than Francis Ngannou? Yes. Is he more dangerous than Francis Ngannou? Absolutely not. And Malik Scotch He's an odd guy.
Strange.
Tends to think outside of the box. And I kind of see what he's getting at, that Francis Ngannou, he's a wild card. What you see is a very big guy, very strong guy, very durable guy, who, while he's not as experienced as Andy Ruiz, that doesn't mean he's not dangerous.
He's a wild card, is what he is, and he just put the heavyweight division on notice. Now we know not to underestimate him. Very awkward.
Awkward is the word. Fighters by trade, pugilists. It's a more conventional arena for the likes of a Deontay Wilder, guy who's used to boxing, other boxers that are used to boxing. You have an idea what to expect, but with Francis, you don't, because he's not a conventional boxer. He's not a seasoned guy. I understand what Malik Scotch is getting at, though in truth, almost any solid fighter at this point would be a risky opponent for Deontay Wilder because he's getting up there in age.
Yes.
He hasn't fought in over a year, and landing that big right hand of his, it does rely on timing. Timing the other man coming in to get through with that big right hand. When you haven't fought in a long time, that's what ring rust affects. It affects your timing, your reflexes, the snap on your punches. Wilder hasn't had to keep busy fighting a long time. So while I understand what Malik is getting at, the way I look at it, both Andy and Francis might be risky opponents for Wilder because he hasn't fought in a long time. He's getting up there in age. He's had 7 or 8 surgeries to the same arm.
And what's his punch resistance like these days? He hasn't been punched in the face in a while. I mean, a long while under the hot lights. What did those 2 systematic beatings do to Deontay Wilder's punch resistance, his durability? You know,
I've never thought of Wilder as being all that durable, even before the 2 beatings at the hands of Tyson Fury, because he was almost knocked out by a journeyman in Harold Sconeers very early in his career. He was rattled by a left hook he walked into in the Eric Molina fight. I believe that was a left hook. That this guy, he's a tall guy, tall, lanky guy at the weight, but not necessarily a big guy, a burly guy, and he doesn't seem to take the best punch, much less now that he's been
fucked up.
beaten 2 times at the hands of Tyson Fury, hasn't fought over a year. If Francis lands on him the way he landed on Fury this past Saturday, what happens?
That's the danger. This is not a textbook boxer. This is not a conventional boxer Wilder would be facing. He's facing a guy who doesn't really know what he's doing yet. Wild card, could do wild things.
And that could, at least in theory, make him awkward to Wilder, unpredictable almost. I don't think it's going to be Ngannou versus Wilder in December. I don't think that. I don't think it's going to be a high-profile opponent that Francis ends up fighting, though as stated, that would be a pleasant surprise.
In any event, we'll see what happens.